If you've ever stood in these mountains at night, you know this. Silence isn't quiet here, it listens. And sometimes it answers. The stories folks pass down, they're not bedtime tales, they're survival guides dressed as whispers. Not everyone should hear them, but you're here now, and once you do, you can't forget. Tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. It always chills me, knowing how many of us are scattered across the map, staring into the same shadows together. Hit like and subscribe. It helps more wanderers stumble into these woods, whether they're ready or not. Let's begin. I was 31 when I realized my life had narrowed into something suffocating. Divorce papers had dried on the table 3 weeks earlier. My teaching contract wasn't renewed, and the apartment lease I'd been clinging to expired that same month. It felt less like a series of accidents and more like the universe had taken me by the shoulders and turned me toward a blank stretch of road. My brother called it a midlife meltdown in advance. I preferred to think of it as starting fresh before I calcified. I'd always told myself I'd hike the mountain corridors that cut across eastern Kentucky into western Virginia. Not the polished tourist loops with gift shops and marked overlooks, but the places where the road still felt like it might crumble into hollows and the maps still had white patches labeled forest land. It wasn't some noble quest for wilderness purity. I just wanted to get lost enough to not hear my own regrets echo. I packed light, 2 changes of clothes, my old hiking pack from grad school, a paperback I'd never finished, and a spiral notebook. No itinerary, no family visits, no social media check-ins. Just me, the Appalachian backroads, and however long the cash in my envelope lasted. I left Charleston on a Thursday afternoon with the kind of aimless momentum you get after you've burned every bridge behind you. The car was a Honda Civic that had lost most of its paint to salt long ago, and the radio died an hour into the drive, forcing me into the rhythm of engine noise and the slow curve of mountains rising higher the further I went. The first night I slept in the car at a truck stop, half woken every 20 minutes by headlights sweeping across the windshield. By Saturday, the fuel gauge was spitting warnings, and I rolled into a place called Miller's Gap just after 9. The town didn't seem dead exactly, but more like it had chosen not to wake up. The only light came from a gas station bulb buzzing above a single pump and a motel sign where only half the letters still glowed. The front office smelled like furniture polish and cigarette ash. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he'd been fixed to that chair since the 70s. He didn't bother with pleasantries, just slid a key across the counter with 2 fingers. "Room 6, he said, and as I turned away, he added, "Don't pull the curtains after midnight. Not unless you want them looking in." It was such a strange warning that I laughed, a reflex I regretted when I saw he wasn't smiling. His eyes had the flatness of someone who meant every syllable. The room itself was sour with damp carpet and cheap detergent. The television buzzed on every channel, and the heater coughed more dust than warmth. I left my pack untouched on the chair, stretched across the stiff bedspread, and tried to breathe myself into sleep. That's when the sound began. It was past midnight, the clock glowing 12:11, when I heard it, soft, deliberate strokes against the glass. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Like someone was drawing shapes with a nail tip. My chest tightened. I whispered that it had to be a branch or a raccoon, though the window opened to nothing but gravel. I forced myself still, palms sweating, until the tempo changed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Frantic, desperate, as if whatever was out there wanted him badly enough to peel the glass away. I sat upright, heart jolting against bone, and whispered, "Who's there?" The sound cut off mid-motion. Silence. The only movement came from the mirror above the dresser. In the reflection of the window, I saw a face pressed against the glass. Skin stretched too tight, hair matted dark and wet, lips moving silently. The eyes were wrong, open too wide, as if held that way by unseen hands. I yanked the curtains together. When I looked again, the glass was bare except for faint smudges, trails where a nose and mouth might have pressed. The light stayed on until dawn. I didn't even check out, just dropped the key on the counter and walked fast to the car. Camping felt safer. Foolish, maybe, but safer. At least there were no windows for someone, or something, to tap against. By dusk I'd found a gravel turnout near a dry creek bed in a place the map called Harlow Ridge. I set up my tent beneath hemlocks, the air thick with the smell of wet leaves. No glow of neon signs here. No hum of televisions, just dark forest silence. I chewed a granola bar by flashlight and zipped myself in. That silence turned heavy quickly, the kind that presses against your eardrums. Then came the steps. Slow, heavy, crunching leaves just beyond the thin nylon wall of my tent. I killed the light, my hand frozen on the zipper. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it was another hiker. Lost, confused. Then a voice cut through the dark, calm and deliberate. "You're on his ridge." Every muscle in my body locked. The voice grew louder, closer. "You don't belong here." I grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on. The beam landed on a man standing 20 feet away, barefoot, his jeans plastered to his legs as though he'd walked through a flood. His shirt clung to him, stained dark, and his eyes didn't blink. "I'm leaving," I stammered, though my throat was too dry for sound. He didn't answer. He simply turned and walked back into the trees, each step swallowed by the dark. I didn't bother folding the tent or grabbing the stove. I sprinted to the car, slammed the locks down, and drove until the tank was nearly empty. The ranger station opened at dawn. I stumbled in, still trembling, and asked, "Is Harlow Ridge private land?" Some guy told me I was trespassing. The ranger, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, looked up from his paperwork. "That's all state park," he said flatly. "Then who the hell?" I began, but he cut me off with a steady stare. "Some things up here don't like being remembered." That was all he offered. No elaboration, no concern. Just that one unsettling sentence. By the time I reached Boone that evening, I'd sworn off campsites and motels alike. I planned to sleep in the car if I had to, but the road into town twisted through a deep stand of pines, and that's where I saw her. A girl in a yellow dress walking barefoot along the shoulder. No light, no bag, no urgency, just steady steps. I slowed, rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" I called. She turned her head. The right side of her face was intact, young, pale, human. The left side was black and ruined, skin peeled back to bone, eye socket hollow. Her voice came as a layered whisper, like many voices braided together. "Don't stop." The words had barely registered before something slammed against the back of my car. I hit the gas, tires spitting gravel, and the road behind me disappeared in the mirror. I didn't slow again until Boone's lights shimmered on the horizon. That night I paid for a hostel bed downtown, thinking the sound of other people breathing in the halls would anchor me back to sanity. But sometime after 2, a knock rattled the door. 3 taps, deliberate. Then a whisper, so close I could feel the breath seep through the keyhole. "You're still on his ridge." I stayed pressed against the floor until daylight filtered through the blinds. I didn't bother with breakfast. I didn't bother explaining at checkout. I drove 10 hours straight, away from mountains, away from hollows and ridges, away from every stretch of road that curved into trees. Even now, years later, I avoid that whole subregion. Not because of what I saw, but because of what followed me into every mirror and every midnight silence since. Because no matter how far I go, I can still hear that voice sometimes, low, steady, patient, reminding me I never really left his land. I was 29 when I decided to take a detour in life, and not just in the figurative sense. After 6 straight years of working double shifts at a hospital in Roanoke, I was burned out. Not the mild kind of burnout people brag about on resumes. Actual chest tightening, can't remember the last time I slept exhaustion. My leave of absence wasn't exactly voluntary. My supervisor told me I either took a break or risked suspension for mistakes I was starting to make with charting. My older cousin in Nashville had just relocated for work and asked me for a favor. His truck, an ancient Dodge Dakota, was still parked back at my parents' house in Richmond. "Take it out to me," he'd said over the phone. "You could use the road trip. Clear your head. Mountains are good medicine." I didn't argue. The thought of highways, solitude, and the excuse of a family errand seemed easier to explain than therapy. I told myself it was an escape disguised as responsibility. The truck had more rust than paint, and the AC hadn't worked since the Obama administration. By the time I got south of Blacksburg, sweat was dripping down my temples, my scrubs-turned road clothes clinging to me. The driver's side window wouldn't roll down past halfway, so wind screamed against my left ear like an angry roommate. The radio only worked in bursts, coughing out static in country stations before fading into silence. By the second day of driving, I was desperate for anything besides interstate lanes. The 18-wheelers boxed me in, and the monotony made my eyelids heavy. When I saw a sun-bleached wooden sign for Cold Spring Hollow, EST 1834, pointing down Route 612, I veered off without a thought. I wanted green canopy roads, the kind of quiet where you can trick yourself into thinking the world isn't collapsing. But the quiet I found there was wrong. Cold Spring Hollow wasn't a town so much as a smear of buildings along the bend of a creek. A gas pump tilted beneath an awning that looked gnawed by termites. A boarded-up church slouched by the roadside. A scattering of trailers with windows blacked out by plywood sat half hidden in weeds. No welcome sign, no laughter of kids playing outside, not even the barking of a dog. The gas station looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter years. I pulled in anyway, running on less than a quarter tank. The pump handle was coated in grime, slick under my fingers like old oil. As I filled up, I realized something that chilled me worse than the heat. There was no sound. No birds, no cicadas, no crickets, no breeze through the trees. The only noise was the steady drip, drip, drip of water leaking from a pipe somewhere behind the building. Inside, the air smelled like mildew and singed rubber. The man behind the counter wore a trucker cap pulled low and a shirt with "Ask Me About Jesus" fading across the chest. His arms rested in his pockets. He didn't greet me, just stared like I'd interrupted him in the middle of something private. $20 on pump one, I said, sliding a bill across. He finally spoke, voice gravelly low. Go ahead. Won't cost you much. I gave a weak laugh, unsure if it was a joke. You got a restroom? He pointed out back. Behind the station was an outhouse that leaned sideways, door hanging crooked on one hinge. I told myself I didn't need it that bad, but my body had other ideas. Inside, the walls were carved with layers of messages, thousands of overlapping names, symbols, numbers. But one phrase was repeated dozens of times, etched deep and hard at the same angle each time. Stay inside after dusk. The words were burned into my mind. I left quickly, stomach twisted, and when the door swung shut behind me, it sounded too much like someone pushing it closed. That's when I noticed movement at the tree-line. At first, I thought it was a man. Tall, thin, but too tall, easily 7 feet or more. His arms weren't at his sides, but held slightly away from his body, stiff, unnatural, like a mannequin set into position. His posture was off, wrong in a way I couldn't name. I blinked, and in that split second he seemed closer, though I hadn't seen him move. I hurried back to the truck. The man from the counter was standing outside now, leaning against the doorway as though he'd been waiting for me. You should keep moving, he said flatly. Don't take the paved road. Go down the gravel behind the shed. Don't stop. Don't roll your window down. Don't talk to anything. My skin prickled. Is this like some local hazing thing? If you stop, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you won't keep going. And if they talk to you, don't answer. I didn't press him. I got in the truck, hands shaking, and rolled toward the shed. The gravel road twisted into the woods like it had no end. Within 5 minutes the sunlight was gone, swallowed by branches arching overhead. My phone lost signal. The GPS map froze mid-spin. I drove slower, gravel crunching under tires, until the radio snapped on at full volume, blaring static so sharp it felt like knives in my ears. I yanked the dial. Nothing changed. Pulled the plug on the AUX cord. Nothing. Beneath the static came a rhythm, almost like chanting. Not words I could understand, more like syllables strung together into a pulse. My hands trembled. I ripped the faceplate from the radio and pulled the wires free. The truck went silent, but the silence pressed harder than the noise, thick and smothering. That's when I saw her, a woman standing in the middle of the road, barefoot, hair tangled across her face, her shirt torn, streaked with mud. She didn't move as I slowed. Her eyes were wrong. Too flat, too blank, like someone had drawn them on paper and pasted them in her sockets. The man's warning roared back in my memory. Don't stop. Don't talk. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked and eased the truck around her. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't even exist in the mirror when I checked. Gone, as if she had only ever been painted on the air in front of me. The clock on my dashboard said 7:08 p.m., but the light outside was pale, washed out gray, like dawn smeared sideways across the sky. My ears popped, pressure shifting like I'd driven up a mountain too fast. Shapes moved between the trees. Dozens of them, all tall, all standing with those stiff mannequin postures, arms slightly away from their sides. Faceless. Watching. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Screen lit up, photo added to camera roll. I tapped it open. The picture was of my truck's back seat. Someone was sitting there. I spun around, nothing. Empty. No one. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked back at the phone. The photo was still there. And then the screen went black. The battery was gone, though it had been at 45% minutes before. Up ahead, the woman reappeared. 10 feet in front of the truck this time. She opened her mouth. Not a scream. Not even a word. Just a small motion, like she was about to whisper something meant only for me. I pressed the accelerator. She stepped backward into the trees without turning. The gravel ended at a rusted gate blocking the way. I didn't hesitate, swerved around it, jostled over a shallow ditch, and hit pavement. Asphalt stretched ahead, faded yellow lines promising civilization. 10 minutes later, I passed a diner lit in neon and a gas station alive with humming lights. Relief hit so hard I nearly wept. I bought water inside, hands shaking, and asked the cashier where I was. About 30 miles west of Franklin, he said casually, like nothing was wrong. But my odometer hadn't budged. The fuel gauge sat full, though I hadn't filled it since Cold Spring Hollow. 2 days later, unpacking my bag in Nashville, I opened the truck's back seat to find long black hairs tangled into the fabric. My trunk floor bore muddy footprints, wide and flat, not mine. When I opened my phone, the mysterious photo was gone. So was every GPS ping between 6:30 and 8:40 that night. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the figures standing stiff in the trees, arms bent outward like they don't quite understand what it means to wear a body. And I can almost hear the rhythm that leaked from the radio, syllables pounding in a cadence too old to be human. I don't tell people I left the hospital because of burnout anymore. I tell them it was the mountains, because it feels like the mountains decided I didn't belong. And I still wonder if Cold Spring Hollow ever let me leave, or if some part of me stayed there, walking stiff among the trees, waiting for the next traveler who doesn't keep driving. I was 32 when I finally ran out of excuses not to leave. I'd been working as a field surveyor in Asheville, and after years of scrambling over ridgelines marking property boundaries, the contracts dried up. No one told me directly that my career was circling the drain, but the silence from old clients was louder than any rejection letter. When my lease ended that August, I didn't bother to renew. I packed what little I cared about, sleeping bag, a cooler, a battered tent from college, and told myself I'd spend a couple of weeks chasing quiet roads and forgotten campgrounds. I wanted distance more than adventure. Distance from the emails I wasn't returning, from the phone calls where my parents asked if I was finally ready to come home, from the gnawing panic that I'd wasted a decade on work no one needed anymore. I wasn't looking for excitement, just silence, maybe a view of mist rolling off mountains that didn't remind me of invoices and deadlines. The first 2 days weren't anything special. A cracked highway through eastern Kentucky, cheap motels with buzzing lights, the taste of instant coffee in paper cups. By the third evening, my gas gauge was already threatening empty, and my GPS had frozen hours earlier. I found myself on a narrow road winding into southern West Virginia. No other cars passed, no billboards, no markers but the endless line of trees. My nerves had just started to itch when a warped wooden post appeared at a curve. Ivy had nearly swallowed the sign, but I could make out the words, Pine Haven, 2 miles. The road downhill had no guardrails, just dirt shoulders crumbling into gullies. When the forest finally opened, it revealed a single gas station squatting by the road. The roofline sagged, and the pumps were the old kind with spinning numbers behind glass. No brands, no logos. The convenience store was fused onto what looked like a shuttered diner, its windows painted over black. A cracked neon open buzzed weakly over the door. Inside, the air smelled of damp cardboard. Behind the counter stood a man about my age, maybe younger. His face was pale in a way that didn't match the summer heat. His eyes tracked me without blinking. "You take cards?" I asked. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "Cash only." I slid a 20 onto the counter. He didn't hand me change, just pushed a keyring toward me with one finger. Restrooms out back. I didn't want it, but hours of gas station coffee had left me no choice. The restroom wasn't a restroom at all, but a leaning outhouse tucked behind the building. Its door creaked like bones when I pulled it open. Inside, the walls were scarred with carvings, names, initials, numbers, but one phrase repeated over and over, cut deep into the wood in long diagonal strokes. "Don't step out after dusk." The words crowded each other, layers on layers, as if scratched by dozens of hands across decades. The moment I shut the door behind me, I felt watched. Not by the cashier, not by any person, from the woods. At first it was only a shape among the trees. Tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the lowest branches. Its arms hung away from its body, stiff, unnatural. It didn't move. It didn't sway like a person trying to balance. It was just there. I hurried back to my car. The cashier was leaning against the doorframe now, waiting. "You should keep driving," he said, his tone still flat but quieter. "Don't take the main road. Follow the gravel by the shed. And don't stop for anyone. If they call to you, don't answer." He didn't give me time to ask questions. He just stepped back inside. The gravel road wound into the forest, and within minutes, daylight vanished. Branches arched over the path until it felt like driving through a tunnel. My phone flickered, searching for service, then died altogether. The GPS map froze. That was when the radio turned on. Full volume. Not music, not a voice, just static so sharp I clapped a hand over my ear. I spun the dial, yanked the AUX cord, but nothing silenced it. Beneath the static came a sound, faint at first, a ringing. Not a clean bell tone, but something cracked and metallic, like rusted iron striking stone. The longer it went on, the more it felt deliberate. A pattern. Calling. My hands shook as I ripped the faceplate from the radio and pulled the wires free. The noise died, but the silence afterward felt worse, swollen and unnatural. And then I saw her. She stood in the middle of the road, barefoot, clothes torn, hair clinging to her face. She didn't flinch as my headlights swept over her. Her eyes were blank, flat, like painted circles with no depth. The cashier's words thudded in my head. "Don't stop. Don't answer." I kept rolling forward, easing around her. She didn't move. When I checked the mirror, she wasn't there. The clock on my dash read 7:21, but the world outside had dimmed into a colorless gray. My ears popped, the way they do when you drive too fast up a mountain. Figures filled the forest. At first just 2 or 3, then dozens. All of them tall. All with arms held stiffly away from their bodies, like children pretending to be mannequins. They didn't follow, but they watched. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. New photo added to gallery. I glanced down. The picture was of my back seat. Someone was sitting there. I spun around. Empty. Nothing but the shadows. My breath hitched in shallow bursts. When I looked at the phone again, the photo was still there. Then the screen went black. Battery dead. Up ahead, another figure stepped into the road. This one shorter. Childlike. Bare feet pale against the gravel. A bell dangled from its hand, swaying in silence until... Clang. The sound rang through the trees, vibrating my teeth. I floored the gas. The figure stepped back without turning, melting into the woods. Minutes later, the gravel road ended at a rusted gate. No markings, just pavement beyond, lined in faded yellow. I swerved around the gate post, tires jarring over the ditch, and hit asphalt. 10 minutes later I saw neon. A diner. A real gas station with humming lights. Civilization. I stumbled inside and bought water, hands still trembling. "Where am I?" I asked the cashier. "About 30 miles west of Summersville," he said. But my odometer hadn't moved more than 3 miles since the gas station in Pine Haven, and my fuel gauge hadn't dropped at all. 2 nights later, at a chain motel in Charleston, I finally unpacked the truck. Mud streaks trailed across the back seat, not mine. Long black hairs clung to the upholstery. When I checked my phone, the picture of the back seat was gone. So was every GPS ping between 6:45 and 9 o'clock that night. I told myself I was done. No more back roads, no more detours. I stuck to cities, chain motels with humming vending machines and light leaking under the door. But sometimes lying awake, I hear it again. A bell. Not close, not loud, just one deep clang, as if carried on the wind from somewhere in the hills. I freeze every time listening, because I'm afraid if I ever hear it answer back, ring after ring, drawing nearer, I won't be able to stop myself from following. And I know if I do, I won't come back. I decided to take some time off. I'd been teaching middle school history in Cleveland for almost a decade, and by the spring semester my nerves were shot. I don't know if it was the constant testing, the classroom fights, or the way the district kept asking for more while giving us less, but I found myself driving home every night with the radio off just so I could hear nothing for 20 minutes. My wife told me I was starting to grind my teeth in my sleep. When the year ended and I had no summer classes scheduled, I thought maybe a long road trip through the Appalachians would quiet me down. My younger cousin Ethan had been pestering me for months about getting back to nature. He'd just come off a short contract in IT support and was restless, convinced modern life was turning him into what he called a blinking cursor with a pulse. I had no better ideas, so when he suggested we take his old Ford wagon through the mountains, sleeping in tents, cooking off a portable stove, no hotels unless lightning drove us inside, I agreed. We didn't overpack. A tent borrowed from his girlfriend, a cooler filled with jerky, trail mix, a dozen cans of cheap energy drinks, and an emergency pack of ramen. I threw in a dented camping stove from my teaching days at outdoor camp. Ethan handled navigation with his phone and some downloaded trail maps. I told myself it was just a couple of teachers' weeks off from responsibility. Two burned-out relatives chasing silence on back roads. The first few days were fine. We camped outside Morgantown the first night, then crossed into the deeper folds of West Virginia, where the hills lean in close and the sky feels half swallowed. It was the kind of trip where even bad meals at roadside diners feel like part of the adventure. But then Ethan found something on a map that changed everything. We'd been driving south on a patched county road when he leaned forward with his phone. There's a trailhead pinned here. No reviews, no photos. Just a name, Crow Hollow Path. You want to check it out? I should have said no. Instead, I shrugged. Might as well. Beats another convenience store picnic. The paved road narrowed into gravel, then dirt. Our wagon jolted through mud ruts as the forest closed in. It felt like we were driving into a throat. After a while we passed a board nailed to a tree. The words carved into it were clumsy but clear. Mind your steps. No mile markers, no logos, no paint. Just those 3 words. Something in me wanted to turn around, but Ethan just whistled low. That's the good stuff. Means nobody else comes out here. The woods looked wrong almost immediately. At first I couldn't place it, then I realized what bothered me. The trees were too evenly spaced. Perfect vertical trunks without low branches, each the same height, each separated by nearly identical gaps. The ground between them was bare, just dirt, no ferns, no moss, no fallen branches. It was like walking onto a stage set, where someone had built a forest from memory, but didn't understand how real forests breathe. I said nothing. Ethan was humming to himself, drumming the dashboard. That was when the deer appeared. It stood dead center on the road. Not grazing, not startled, just still. Its eyes were clouded, as though filmed over, but not glowing. Its head tilted slightly to one side, like it was listening. I slowed. Ethan rolled down his window. Hey! Get moving. The deer didn't flinch. And then, without staggering, without bracing, it collapsed straight down, legs folding underneath, as if someone had cut the strings holding it up. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then I eased the car around its body. In the mirror, it lay exactly where it had fallen, unmoving. By the time we reached the clearing that marked the trailhead, the sun was already dipping low. A wooden post jutted from the earth with Crow Hollow carved into it, rough and uneven, as if done with a pocket knife. No maps. No facilities. No other cars. Ethan climbed out, stretching. Perfect. This is exactly what I was hoping for. I stared at the uniform trees. You sure? He grinned like I'd asked if water was wet. This is the point, man. Unmapped. Unreviewed. Real. So I followed. The trail was narrow, almost swallowed by weeds, but it pressed forward. Silence clung to us. No insects, no birds, no wind in the canopy. My boots felt too loud, crunching gravel that should have been swallowed by soil. We set up camp a mile in. The fire sputtered in a circle of rocks Ethan kicked together. He cracked a can of beer and passed me one. I held it without opening it. My stomach felt wrong. That night something woke me. Not a howl, not a rustle. A sound like tapping. 3 clicks, each spaced by a pause. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was a branch knocking in the wind. Then I realized there was no wind. I nudged Ethan awake. His eyes opened instantly. He'd heard it too. The clicking repeated, steady, mechanical. Tap, tap, tap. I unzipped the tent an inch. The night outside was absolute. No moon, no fire left, just a darkness that felt pressed against my face. And then I saw it. Between 2 trunks stood something tall and narrow, its head tilted at the same angle as the deer. Too thin, too motionless. Watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I zipped the tent shut. There's someone out there. Ethan clutched his pocket knife. We sat awake until the gray light of dawn filtered through the nylon walls. Neither of us spoke. We broke camp and headed back to the car. The road, however, betrayed us. We drove an hour straight and steady, yet somehow passed the same "mind your steps" sign we'd seen the day before, from the same direction. The GPS had frozen hours ago. My stomach sank. Ethan muttered something about bugs in the software, but he didn't sound convinced. Eventually the trees opened on a clearing where a boarded-up gas station sagged. Its windows were dark, its lot empty, but a payphone clung to the wall, plastic faded by decades of sun. Ethan lifted the receiver. It's got a dial tone. He called his older brother. I leaned against the wagon, staring at the woods. When he came back, his face was pale. His hands shook. He said I called him last night, Ethan whispered. He said I whispered for 3 minutes straight. Can you hear them? I don't remember doing that. We left the car. Neither of us wanted to drive that road again. We cut west through brush until we stumbled onto a logging path. Hours passed. Then near a bend, we saw another deer. Same size. Same clouded eyes. Same tilted head. Ethan snapped. He hurled rocks, shouting, waving his arms like a madman. The deer didn't move. Let's go, I hissed. We didn't stop until we found a logging truck idling at the bend. Its driver was an older man with a ball cap pulled low. He watched us approach without surprise. You boys lost? We nodded. He didn't ask questions. Just said, get in. He drove us 40 miles to a diner. Dropped us off. Never explained. Inside the diner, Ethan's phone lit with 10 missed calls. All from his brother. All time-stamped at the exact same minute. Each voicemail was the same. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks. We never went back for the car. I filed it as stolen 6 months later, just to stop the registration notices. In the years since, I've changed my number twice. But every so often, a call slips through from an unknown line. Always the same. 3 clicks. Pause. 3 clicks. Nothing else. And though I don't tell my wife or my colleagues, sometimes late at night, when the house is still, I hear it faintly from the woods behind my house. 3 clicks. Pause. 3 clicks. And I wonder how much of me ever really left Crow Hollow. I was 28 this summer. I agreed to a trip I should have walked away from. At the time, it didn't feel like a big choice. I'd been working freelance graphic design jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent in Cincinnati, drifting through endless contracts and meaningless projects. My college roommate, Damon, sent me a message one night with a link to some obscure blog about Appalachian places you're not supposed to find. Normally, I'd have laughed. The article was the usual mix: haunted coal camps, phantom highways, and a place supposedly swallowed by a sinkhole that no map ever admitted had been there. But Damon followed it with, what if we tried it? He always had that restless streak. His girlfriend had just left him. He'd been drinking too much, and I think he wanted something reckless to fill the hole. Our mutual friend Lena chimed in almost immediately. She'd just quit a nonprofit job in disgust and was on a self-described mission to live raw. A fourth joined us too, Marcus, a quiet guy Damon knew through work. I didn't know him well, but he tagged along, saying little, carrying himself like someone already resigned to whatever might happen. I said yes partly out of boredom, partly because saying no would have meant another summer rotting in front of a screen. We threw together 2 tents, a cooler with snack food, borrowed a camp stove, and piled into Damon's Jeep, which rattled louder than my blender. The first couple of nights felt like every half-baked road trip. Cheap gas station meals, Forest Service campsites with cracked fire rings, ghost stories told too late at night. We wandered through an abandoned farmhouse where Lena swore she saw lights flicker upstairs. Marcus muttered it was probably wiring, though the place hadn't had power in 30 years. None of it scared me in a lasting way. It was creepy the way Halloween is creepy, safe, artificial, a scare you could shake off. Then Damon stumbled on a comment buried in some forgotten corner of the internet. It wasn't even an article, just a reply on a forum about vanished towns. Someone had written, "If you really want to see something different, find Bramble Rock. It's not a ghost town. It's not abandoned. It's something else." That was it. No details. No photos. No coordinates. But Damon latched onto the name like a dog with a bone. He spent half the next night hunched over his laptop in a McDonald's parking lot, using their free Wi-Fi, cross-referencing mining maps, scanning decades-old trail names, and piecing together hints from long-dead blogs. By dawn he announced he'd found the location, tracing a line of old forest roads that didn't appear on modern maps. We left pavement behind just after noon. The dirt road chewed at the Jeep's tires, branches scraping against the sides like claws. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest looked. At first it was just thick, then it was too thick. Trunks all at the same angle, spaced like soldiers. No undergrowth, no animal noise, no air movement at all. My phone dropped out of service. Lena's followed. Marcus checked his watch as though time itself might stop working next. Hours later we reached a clearing that felt dim, even though the sun still stood overhead. The canopy blocked so much light that the whole place looked like it was waiting for dusk. On one side of the clearing squatted 3 trailers, their siding half rusted, half swallowed by earth. Across from them rose a crude structure that looked like someone had tried to imitate a church from memory. For shipping containers welded together, a jagged steeple hammered from tin roofing sheets. There were no driveways, no paths, no signs of vehicles ever reaching this place. Just silence. Damon leapt out, grinning like a man who'd discovered treasure. "We found it," he whispered, as if the trees might be listening. Lena didn't look convinced. She disappeared briefly behind the Jeep and came back pale. "There's someone out there," she muttered. "Watching." I asked what she meant. She just shook her head. They weren't moving, just standing. Damon laughed nervously, trying to film with his camcorder. Marcus drifted toward one of the trailers, curiosity written all over his face. The trailer's door hung ajar. Inside the air reeked of rot and something sharp, like ammonia. The floor sagged. Against one wall sat a mattress stained black down its middle. No sheets, no frame. Just foam eaten away by years. The paneling was carved with gouges, some shallow, some deep, layer after layer until words and symbols blurred together. I traced one with my flashlight. They weren't random. They weren't English either. "That's not graffiti," Marcus whispered. Before we could argue, we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling outside in the dirt. We froze. Lena gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. Then a voice rasped from behind the trailer, low and broken. "Leave this place." We bolted. Even Damon dropped his camera. For once, he didn't argue about leaving. But when we hit the clearing, his eyes locked on the church-shaped structure. 5 minutes, he begged. Just one shot inside. Proof. Lena cursed him under her breath. Marcus followed, muttering something about wanting to see for himself. Against my better judgment, I trailed after. The church door yawned open. Inside the air was bone dry, as though moisture had been sucked away. Wooden benches mismatched and warp-formed makeshift pews. At the far end, a pile of cinder blocks topped with a plank made for a pulpit. Above it hung a circle of woven vines, thick and brittle, knotted together with strands of what looked horribly like hair. Rusted nails jutted from it in uneven rows. Dark stains spread around their bases. "What the hell is that?" Lena whispered. Before I could answer, every candle in the place burst into flame at once. Dozens of them lined the walls, the floor, even the pulpit. All alight. The door slammed shut. The floorboards groaned. A bulge rippled through the center aisle, as though something enormous was pushing upward from beneath. The wood cracked, splintered. A wet sound followed, accompanied by whispers, not one voice, but many, racing over each other in a language too fast, too old to grasp. Marcus grabbed the broken board like a weapon. "If it comes through." The floor split open. Something black and slick forced its way up. A hand jointed wrong, fingers bending both ways. Another followed, grasping. Marcus screamed and swung. The candles went dark. In the pitch black, I heard him choke, gurgling, dragged down. A heavy thud, then a wet, dragging sound. "Don't move," Damon hissed. His voice was trembling. We obeyed. When the candles flared back to life, Marcus was gone. Blood smeared the aisle from the broken boards to the pulpit. The vine circle above swayed gently, though there was no breeze. The door opened on its own. We didn't think. We ran. Lena lost a shoe. Damon left his camera. I don't remember breathing until the Jeep's doors slammed shut and the engine coughed to life. We drove until we found a gas station on the highway hours later. We stumbled inside, shaking, half-mad. We told the clerk a friend had vanished. A deputy came, notebook in hand, expression stiff. We tried to explain what happened, but the moment we said the words Bramble Rock, his face went blank. "That place doesn't exist," he said flatly. "Never heard of it." I believed him in the worst way, because his eyes said he had heard of it, and he didn't dare admit it out loud. We never saw Marcus again. His family filed a report. Damon tried to convince himself we imagined it all, that Marcus had run off. Lena doesn't talk about it, but sometimes late at night I hear it still. The whispering. Not outside, inside, under the floorboards of my own house. Like something trying to remember my name. And I wonder how long it will take before the circle we saw sways above me too. I was 34 the summer I decided to leave everything behind and head into the mountains. I'd spent most of my adult life as a high school art teacher in Charlotte, but when the district downsized, my name was on the list. Losing the job wasn't a shock. It had been coming for years, but when I cleared out my classroom, packed the brushes and half-finished student canvases, I realized I had nothing holding me in the city anymore. No partner, no family nearby, not even friends close enough to notice when I disappeared. So I threw a duffel bag in the back of my rusting Ford Ranger, grabbed an old Nikon camera I hadn't touched in years, and decided I'd spend a few weeks tracing the Blue Ridge backroads. My excuse was that I wanted to photograph forgotten towns for a side project, but the truth was simpler. I wanted to vanish where nobody expected lesson plans or bills. The first few days were gentle. Morning fog over the ridges, breakfast plates at diners where the waitresses still called you Han. Long silences broken only by my tires humming along Tulane blacktop. I stayed in roadside motels, the kind with plastic flowers on the counter and faded carpet, each one blending into the next. For a while, I felt lighter. It changed on the fourth day. Somewhere past Jackson County, I noticed a cut of road my GPS didn't recognize, an unmarked lane peeling off the highway into a darker stretch of trees. A wooden sign leaned against a leaning oak, its letters burned into the wood. Hollow Pines. No mileage, no arrows, just those two words. I almost kept driving, but I hadn't eaten since morning, and there was something about the name that made me curious. I told myself maybe it was one of those small communities with a diner or a general store worth photographing. I turned in. The road was barely wide enough for my truck, gravel crunching under the tires as the canopy closed over me. The deeper I drove, the dimmer the light grew, as if the afternoon had skipped straight to twilight. After a mile or two, I came to a clearing. Hollow Pines. Calling it a town would have been generous. There were a few scattered homes, a boarded-up store, and a gas station with a single rusted pump. At the far end of the road sat a church with a leaning steeple, its paint flaking like old parchment. Beside it was a white house with a wooden sign, Rooms. The place felt abandoned, except for one figure, an older man sitting on a rocking chair outside the white house. His hair was long and gray, his eyes fixed somewhere past me, though I could tell he saw me the moment I stepped out. "You'll want a room," he said before I could speak. His voice was flat, not unkind but oddly final, like he was finishing a conversation that had already begun without me. I almost said no, but the sun had already dropped behind the ridge, and I didn't want to risk navigating that road in the dark. I paid cash, and he handed me a key without counting it. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and something faintly medicinal, like dried herbs. The hallway had 4 doors. Mine was the last on the left. The room itself was plain but neat. A twin bed, a quilt that looked hand-stitched, a dresser that wobbled when I set my bag on it. The window faced the tree line, where shadows moved even when the air was still. I told myself I was just tired, that every small town feels strange if you arrive unannounced. But as I lay on the bed, unease gnawed at me. By dusk, I needed to get out, if only to breathe different air. I wandered past the shuttered store and down a dirt path behind the church. That's when I noticed it, a glow deeper in the forest, flickering orange like firelight. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped off the path. The woods grew unnaturally quiet the farther I went. No crickets, no breeze, not even the scrape of my boots seemed to belong. The glow brightened until I saw them, a circle of figures around a fire, their bodies draped in rough, bark-colored robes. They weren't chanting, weren't moving at all, just standing in complete stillness. For a second I thought maybe it was a reenactment, a local ritual I'd stumbled into. Then one of them turned its head toward me. Not suddenly, just a slow, deliberate swivel, and every other hooded face followed as though strung together by wire. The fire didn't crackle, it pulsed, like a living thing inhaling and exhaling. And though no one spoke, something pressed into my head like a weight, a rhythm I couldn't hear but felt pounding in my ribs. I staggered back, careful not to break into a run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but some primitive part of me knew showing panic would be worse. When I finally cleared the tree line and stepped onto the road, I realized I'd been holding my breath so long my chest burned. Back in the house, I locked the door and shoved the dresser against it. Sleep didn't come. At some hour past midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, measured. They stopped at my door. The knob rattled once. Just once. I sat frozen until the first light of dawn. By morning, I'd already packed. I left the key on the bedspread and walked quickly to my truck. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a bundle of dried pine needles tied with twine. I brushed it to the ground without touching it. The drive out felt longer than the drive in, as if the road had stretched during the night. When I finally reached the highway, I didn't look back. Later, at a diner off Route 74, I checked my camera, flipping through the shots I'd taken since leaving Charlotte. The photo I'd taken of the church in Hollow Pines was missing. In its place was a black square, no timestamp, no file data, nothing but void. That was the last time I strayed off the main roads. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still feel that silent rhythm in my chest, like something waiting to remind me I was never supposed to leave. I'd been working nights at a warehouse, shoving boxes down conveyor belts, listening to the same 4 radio stations until my head felt like it was full of static. My girlfriend had just moved in with someone else, and my landlord kept reminding me I was 3 months behind on rent. One Tuesday, I clocked out early, walked straight to my car, and pointed it south. I didn't pack much, just some clothes, a bag of chips, and my father's old pocket knife that I always kept in the glove box. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Truth was, I didn't know myself. The only plan I had was to drive until the road felt different, until the hum of the city and the stink of hot pavement were replaced with trees and silence. Appalachia had always been this vague line in my head, a place of maps and ghost stories, and I figured if I kept south and east long enough, I'd run into it. By the second day, I was winding through hills where fog clung to the trees like gauze. The towns I passed were mostly gas stations, thrift stores, and churches with crooked signs promising revival tonight. I stayed in a few low-rate motels, ate biscuits at diners that hadn't changed their wallpaper since the 70s, and for the first time in years, I felt like nobody expected anything from me. It was the 3rd evening when I left the state highway and found myself on a county road with no lines painted on it. The light was fading, that strange blue hour where every shadow looks alive. My gas gauge was close to empty, and I told myself I'd pull over at the next sign of life. A few miles later, I saw it, a splintered board nailed to a leaning fence post. The letters were carved, not painted, Cold Spring. I slowed down, expecting maybe a farm town or a place with a single diner. Instead, the road narrowed into gravel, then dipped between 2 walls of pine that pressed so close it felt like I was driving through a tunnel. The air had that heavy stillness you only get before a storm, except the sky above was clear. After about 10 minutes, the trees opened, and I found myself in what could barely be called a town. A scattering of houses, some with windows covered in plywood, others sinking into their foundations. There was a whitewashed church with a broken steeple, and across from it a squat wooden building with a faded sign that just said store. In front of the store was a single gas pump, the kind so old I wasn't sure it would even work. I pulled in, relieved, but there was no attendant. The store's windows were streaked with grime. On the porch, a rocking chair moved gently, as if someone had just left it, though the air was perfectly still. I was about to honk when a woman stepped out from the doorway. She looked to be in her 50s, hair pulled back tight, face like weathered leather. She didn't smile, didn't ask where I'd come from. She just said, "Room's inside if you need it," like she'd been expecting me. Something about the certainty in her tone made me hesitate, but my tank was nearly dry, and the night air was getting colder by the minute. I nodded. She gestured me in, and I followed her into the store. Inside smelled of dust and dried flowers. The shelves held cans so old the labels had curled, jars of candy that had melted together into a single lump, and a cracked fishbowl filled with marbles. There was no register, just a counter scarred with knife marks. She led me through a side door into a narrow hall. Her doors lined it, one with a key already in the lock. "That one's yours," she said. "Bathroom at the end. No noise after dark." She didn't wait for me to respond before turning away. The room was small, twin bed, wooden dresser, a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. The window looked out toward the tree line, which seemed unnaturally close, as if the forest had crept forward while the town slept. I tried to settle in, but unease sat heavy in my stomach. Around dusk, I decided to walk, hoping a little air might clear my head. The road through Cold Spring was silent, not even a dog barking in the distance. The gas pump stood motionless, the store already locked up tight. I drifted past the church and noticed a narrow path behind it, a trail worn just enough to suggest use. I should have turned back, but curiosity pushed me forward. The path wound into the woods, and after 100 yards or so, I saw it, an orange glow flickering deeper among the trees. At first I thought it was a campfire, but as I drew closer, the light moved strangely, pulsing rather than burning. Then I saw them. A circle of figures stood around the glow, each cloaked in rough brown fabric with hoods pulled low. They weren't moving, not speaking, just standing in absolute stillness. The light came not from firewood, but from inside the ground itself, a ring of stones encircling a pit that radiated an amber glow like molten rock. One of the figures turned its head toward me, and the others followed, not in staggered motion but all at once, as if commanded by the same hand. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The glow brightened, and for an instant I swore I saw something inside it shift, like the shape of hands pressing against the underside of water. I stumbled back, twigs snapping underfoot. None of them moved toward me, but I couldn't bear their gaze. I turned and hurried back down the trail, not daring to run until the church came into sight again. Back in the room, I locked the door, shoved the dresser against it, and sat on the bed with my knife in hand. Hours passed in silence, until sometime past midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. The knob turned just once. Then nothing. I stayed awake until dawn, eyes fixed on the sliver of gray light growing through the curtains. As soon as I judged it bright enough, I packed my bag and slipped out. The woman was nowhere in sight. When I reached my truck, I saw something tucked under the wiper, a bundle of dried pine needles bound with twine. I knocked it to the ground and drove off without looking back. It wasn't until later, sitting in a diner 2 towns over, that I pulled out my phone to scroll through the pictures I'd taken. One shot was missing, the one I knew I'd taken of the carved sign that read Cold Spring. In its place was a file that showed only black. No metadata, no timestamp, just a rectangle of void. For weeks afterward, I dreamed of the pit glowing in the woods, and of faces turning in perfect unison. Sometimes, I'd wake with the smell of cedar in my nose and the sensation that if I rolled over, someone would be standing at my bedside. That was 5 years ago. I haven't told anyone the whole story until now. The truck still has scratches down the side from branches on that gravel road, proof I didn't imagine it. And sometimes, when I leave the window open at night, I hear a sound drifting up from the street below. Not footsteps, not voices. A faint, breathless whistling. I was 28 the summer my younger brother Luke convinced me to join him on what he called a pilgrimage through forgotten places. He'd been running this small online channel where he documented abandoned mills, train depots, and roadside ruins scattered across the South. Most of his videos barely cracked a few hundred views, but he treated the work like it was a sacred duty, like somebody had to record the bones of the past before they were swallowed completely by vines and dust. I'd just been laid off from a contracting job and didn't have a reason to say no. I figured a week in the mountains was better than stewing in my apartment, staring at unpaid bills. Luke's pitch was simple: no GPS, no interstate, just Appalachian backroads and whispers of places too obscure for Instagram explorers. He had a battered folder of printed maps and handwritten notes scavenged from old forums, half-legible directions that read like riddles. Turn past the red gate, look for a stone cross in the brush, or follow the creek until you hear no birds. His treasure list was full of strange names: Ashwell Mill, Widow's Orchard, St. Olen's Retreat. We crammed my car with cheap camping gear, a couple cameras, tripods, and a cooler stuffed with sodas and gas station jerky. Luke carried himself like he was hosting a documentary, always narrating in this hushed tone he thought sounded cinematic. I mostly kept quiet and drove. The first couple days weren't bad. We found an old iron bridge with weeds poking through the planks, a cemetery fenced in with rusted iron, and a church with its roof collapsed inward like a broken jaw. Luke filmed everything, whispering about forgotten faith and industry lost to time. It was exhausting but harmless. By the third day, the backroads had turned mean, narrow gravel veins that twisted deeper into West Virginia's hills, where cell service had died hours ago. That's when Luke leaned forward and pointed to a dirt lane half swallowed by brush. "There," he said. His notes claimed it led to a place called Briar Glen Academy, a boarding school shuttered in the late 80s. No official records, no photos, nothing but rumors of accidents and disappearances. The lane was barely wide enough for the car. Branches scraped the sides like claws, and the tires cracked over stones hidden under weeds. I wanted to turn back more than once, but Luke had that stubborn gleam in his eye, the same one he wore when he was a kid, daring me to climb higher or jump farther. After 15 minutes, the trees thinned, and the ground dipped into a clearing. At its center squatted the remains of a building half buried in the earth. Stone walls jutted from the slope like ribs, with vines knotted tight around the edges. A crooked door leaned on one hinge, dark as a cave mouth. Windows gaped open, jagged with glass. It didn't look like a school. It looked like a place the ground had tried to swallow. Luke was out of the car before I cut the engine. He filmed every angle, whispering into the camera as if we'd uncovered some archaeological marvel. I followed reluctantly, my boots crunching over moss and broken glass. The air smelled of mildew and iron, damp enough to sting my nose. Inside, the first floor tilted as though the entire foundation had sagged. Hallways angled sideways, paint peeled in long strips, and the ceiling sagged low in places where water had rotted the beams. One wall still bore the ghostly outlines of crayon drawings, stick figures with round, empty heads. Luke found the stairs leading down and didn't hesitate. I trailed after him, uneasy. The steps were soft and spongy, groaning under each footfall. At the bottom, the basement yawned wider than I expected, a cavern of collapsed furniture, broken tables, and the faint stench of something sour. This was the cafeteria, Luke whispered into his lens. His flashlight swung across overturned trays, benches bleached gray with rot, and a mural half faded on the wall. Children holding hands, faces rubbed away by time. We wandered deeper. One room was filled with toppled cabinets, paper melted into the floor. Another still had desks lined in neat rows, all facing a cracked chalkboard. Across it, scratched faintly but unmistakably, were words, "Don't sing after dark." The message made my stomach lurch, though Luke grinned like he'd struck gold. He kept filming, narrating theories about school rules and rituals. Then came the sound. At first I thought it was a draft whining through the broken walls, but it wasn't steady. It rose and fell, a low vibration that prickled against my ears like pressure changing on a plane. Luke angled his light toward a far door. "It's coming from there," he said. The door was swollen shut, edges splintered. Luke pushed. Nothing. He kicked, and the sound behind it seemed to grow sharper, almost musical, like someone dragging nails across piano strings. I told him to leave it, but he ignored me, crossing into a side room instead. The shelves there were lined with jars, some empty, others clouded with sediment. A few contained pale shapes floating in murky liquid, shriveled plants, maybe, or something worse. My stomach turned. That's when a voice called from the stairwell, clear, calm, and close. Luke. He froze. The flashlight shook in his hand. We hadn't told anyone where we were going. Then it came again. The same word, the same tone. Luke. This time it sounded closer, as if the voice had slipped further inside. He shut off his light. I did the same. Darkness swallowed us whole. We held our breath, listening. The voice spoke again, right behind us now. Luke. It wasn't echoing. It wasn't distorted. It was crisp, exact, like a recording played in the same room. Something shifted across the floor. Wet, heavy, dragging itself with speed. We didn't wait. We bolted toward the stairs, stumbling over debris. The thing behind us scraped and slapped against the stone, faster than feet should move. We didn't look. We ran until daylight burned our eyes. Outside, the clearing was silent. The forest around us seemed too still, as if every insect and bird had vanished. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys. Luke yanked open the passenger door, his face pale and slick with sweat. When the headlights flicked on, the beam caught movement at the tree line. Something pale and jointed slid back into the shadows, its arm bending wrong at the elbow, fingers long enough to clutch the trunk like rope. 6 fingers, each tipped in nail. I floored it. Gravel spat under the tires as we tore down the path. Neither of us spoke until we reached a gas station 20 miles out, its fluorescent lights buzzing like an oasis. Inside, in a bathroom that reeked of rust, Luke finally whispered what he'd kept from me. He said Briar Glen had stories. Children gone missing, staff unaccounted for. Officially it had been condemned for structural collapse, but locals claimed something lived under the floors, something that hated singing, hated noise. They called it the Choirless. I stared at him, furious he hadn't said sooner. He only shook his head, eyes hollow. I didn't think it was real. Later that night, at a motel with carpets that smelled of mildew, Luke opened his camera to check the footage. Every clip inside the school was corrupted. Lines streaked across the screen, audio filled with a single low drone. Except one. The chalkboard. Don't sing after dark. The words scrawled there moved on the playback, curling into new shapes as we watched. A sentence that hadn't been there in the basement. Luke already belongs.